Hey y'all, it is Cody from the Keepers of Nerdom. How y'all doing? Today I really wanted to share something that's near and dear to my heart. I think I've talked about it before, but I don't know that I read the letter itself. My great uncle Wally served in World War II, and I knew him for several years before he passed away. And it would have been the early 2000s when he passed away, I believe. And before he passed away, when we went over to his house and helped him with stuff with my dad, just to take care of him and help him, he found out that I was intrigued and interested in World War II. And so he shared a few things with me when I was younger, but he actually wrote me a letter and left me with a small Tanks of World War II book by Collins and Janes. And very simple little book with just little, 2-page detail things typically about vehicles, mostly tanks. There's some exceptions to that in here as well. And because he was in the armored corps, part of the military, and he wrote me a letter that just shared his adventures through the war to some extent and some of the things he told me personally. And I want to read that to you too and add a few extra things that I learned from him personally. And that way, for one, it's recorded for you all out on the internet to have, because I think it's important to hear these stories. But it's also that way, if I somehow forget someday or have dementia when I'm older, it's there and it can be remembered. And I want to share these things. So let me read to you the letter that my great uncle Wally wrote me and the extra stories that he told. He starts with this. It's just a short letter, but he says, "Dear Cody, from what your dad tells me, this little book should be of special interest to you." Talking about the Tanks of World War II book. Because my dad had told him about this, and we talked further as well. So the first thing he says here then is page 76 is a German Panther. Page 80 is a Tiger. Page 86 is a Tiger II. And so he had some highlights, and he said these were the kinds of German tanks we ran into. So he actually had combat with these, or at least saw them out on the battlefield. He said we also had to contend with the German 88. He's talking about the 88 millimeter flak gun that was turned into an anti-tank weapon. The best all-around big gun of World War II. They were usually mounted such as an artillery piece. And page 202, he says, we had one of these in our company. Page 202 in the book is, if you have this at home, gotta say, it's amazing. He says it was used as an armored recovery vehicle and maintenance vehicle. So if you could guess, that's usually something that was really early on in the war that was then still used later on, but had served out its life as its typical function. And page 202 is the section for the medium tank M3, the Lee, or the Grant, depending on the variant. And it's the predecessor to the Sherman, so that way they could get a 75 millimeter gun into the hull and at least have something larger to deal with things. And so he actually saw one of these things, and it's one of my favorite tanks to this day because of how odd it is, but also just how brilliant it is to at least get a 75 millimeter weapon into a chassis like that. Now, he also says page 206, out of a total of 6 tanks I was in that got hit, several of those would have been this type. So he was in 6 different tanks that got hit. And page 206 is a medium tank M4, and it's an early production of the Sherman. And so it has a much more rounded hull than the later models on the top section near the turret. Very interesting because obviously Shermans were everywhere in the U.S. military, so it makes sense. Page 208 is the much improved, he says. This was a much improved MAE-2, so the Sherman late production. A lot better gun, better suspension. So some of them had a 76.2 millimeter gun instead of the 75. They were faster. This was the type of tank I was in when last wounded. We'll talk about that in just a moment. He says 3 days before our outfit met the Russians at Dessay on the Elbe River. So he was that close to the end of the war, to the point where they were about to meet up with the Russians from east to west, right? Like they were meeting that close. He says, I didn't get to meet them. I was in a hospital in Metz, France. And I'll talk about exactly what went on there unless he already brings it up. Page 206, as stated in the description, it states that they were even armed with 105 millimeter howitzers, and that was, again, the Sherman. And after I got out of service, I was in the National Guard for, I think it says 52 years. If so, that's a long time, but it's hard to read some of his writing there. The years part I can read, but the years, it looks like a 5 and some sort of scribbled 2, but that's a long time. 1 year at summer camp, I was a range officer on the back of one of these 105 units. Page 228. Oh, sorry, it's for 5 to 6 years. There it is. Yeah, 56 years or 52 years. That's a long time. 5 to 6 years. There, I could read it now. It's a hyphen. Sorry. It's that interesting thing that if you try to read somebody's handwriting from the past, it's just different. And I love seeing it though, because it's not that it's bad handwriting. It's just different. And I really appreciate trying to reread it. And I've read it several times. Page 228 says, it's the light tank M24 Chaffee. And he says, page 228, at an armored officers advanced school at Fort Knox, Kentucky, I drove one of these. Fun. It could really go. In the book, it says it had the ability of a max speed of 34.78 miles per hour, or 56 kilometers. Easy to drive. Ask me, I'll tell you a funny story about this tank. I did ask him, and the funny story was this. He said that a reporter came by and asked to get some information about the tank and would love to ride in one, and so they agreed and let him, but they let him ride in the turret and forgot to tell him to hold on, and so when he was done with that ride, he had to be rushed to the hospital with 2 broken arms. And so he found that funny, and I laugh at it, but it's like, dang, man, that's harsh. So definitely a pretty intense journey there, that's for sure. And then he continues on page 232. 232 is a heavy tank M26 Pershing, and he said it was in our company there. We had one of these assigned to our company late in the war. There's an unfortunate story here. I'm not exactly sure what that story was, and I don't remember that piece. If he ever told me that one, I don't remember it. On the inside, though, he says of the back cover is the weapon whereby I was wounded the last time. He had actually, in this book, found in a magazine a picture of a German soldier carrying a Panzerfaust and cut it out and glued it into the back of this book. And it says in the book, German one-man bazooka called Panzerfaust, an anti-tank weapon. This is what got my last tank, he wrote in the book for me. And so even the book itself has little scribbles and notes occasionally for some of the things that he was in, and I love seeing that. And then that last page is like the icing on the cake, the best part, that he even found something, and because he wanted to make sure to show me exactly what it was. And he says this was called a Panzerfaust, a one-man bazooka or anti-tank weapon. And then he says, I still carry some of the shrapnel in my head. And he carried that till the day he passed away. As stated on page 209, he says, tank crews added various things to the exterior of the tank as added protection. We normally strapped logs on our tanks. These bazookas, the Panzerfaust, wouldn't work when hitting logs. If you will notice on the back cover, there was a shaped charge on the Panzerfaust. These were actually 2 explosions. The first adhered the Panzerfaust to the metal. Then the shaped charge exploded, forcing all its energy into a very small area that would penetrate the tank, sending hundreds of metal fragments, shrapnel, inside. This is basically what I mean. He has a little drawing of it. My last tank had logs strapped all over except for one place. If you'll notice on pages 206 and 208, on top of the turret, there's a 50 cal machine gun that sits up on a gun mount that extends maybe a foot above the turret. The Panzerfaust that got us went through the 50 cal machine gun mount, then deflected by the open hatches down into the turret, killing the tank commander and wounding both the gunner and me. Your great Uncle Wally. And lastly, it says the tank on the front cover is exactly like the tanks I was in. It's a Sherman on the front of that little book. At different times, it served as loader, gunner, and tank commander. And so just a little journey right here through a short little 4-page letter that is near and dear to my heart. And I actually read from the copy of the letter I have made a few years ago just to save the letter from being opened up, because I've slowly noticed that on the edges it's getting torn up. And so I want to keep it in as good a shape for as long as possible, because that's that letter and that book are my last connection to my great Uncle Wally, who served in World War II. He wasn't the only family member that did, but he was the one I personally knew and got to really talk with. And the things that he experienced, especially at the end, where they had apparently, when they were just about to meet the Russians, and the thing was, there had been reports that there were no Germans in the area. It was towards the end of the war, so they had the hatches open because this is pre air conditioning, so it's hot and sweaty, and so they had, they have logs strapped to their tank to protect from Panzerfausts, to protect from from actual heavier tank shots and whatnot. But there had been reports that there's no Germans in the area, but apparently nearby the road there still was. And so that shot ricocheted in that open hatch, and as he said, killed the tank commander and wounded both the gunner and himself. And it's fascinating, the journey he went on there. And so he didn't get to meet the Russians because he ended up in a hospital just a few days before then. How it said how many days? There were 3 days out before they met the Russians. This is history, right? This is that little piece of just a puzzle, and it's a beautiful little piece of the story of World War II that's near and dear to my heart, because I had a personal connection with it, a family member that served, and getting to go sit and talk with my great uncle Wally. Man, I will not forget those days lightly. But now, hopefully, neither will you that are listening to this. And I just hope that if you see someone that has served in the military, thank them for their service. They've been through quite a journey to defend the freedoms that we have. And those men that went into war in World War II, they saw conflict, right? The men that were in Korea, Vietnam, I don't know that we can truly imagine unless we've been through some stuff like that. And even modern military, if they've been over in other countries where military activity has happened, I don't know that we can quite imagine the things that they have actually gone through. So this is just a quick little story from my great uncle Wally, and I hope that maybe if this touches, your heart, that maybe you'd want to share a little bit in the comments below about a family member, someone that's experienced conflict in war and how it impacted them. I was always amazed that my great uncle Wally could turn around and just show us the wounds and scars that were still there and point to where basically the shrapnel still was underneath his skin that they had not removed. And so he had, till the day he passed away, a reminder of the things he experienced in there, not just mentally, but also physically, that could be, to some extent seen, right? At least the scars. So, and that's the reality of war. It leaves scars, not just in the physical, but especially in the mental. So I just really appreciate that he shared those things with me and actually told me about that last time when everything went belly up. And it gave me a deep love and appreciation for World War II tanks, especially because they're just such a fascinating evolution of machine during World War II that they really started taking shape into what we know today because of World War II. So yeah, what's some stories from some conflict from a family member that you have? I'd love to see those in the comments below, and thank you all for joining us, and I hope this was a enlightening just piece of information. Thank you so much, and take care. Bye.